Hello, my name is Elijah Jesushe Ogmiale, and I'm the CEO and founder of EmQuip Leadership Trainers and Development Partners Limited. Today I want to share the story behind the story. Why exactly are we building EmQuip Limited? What is the vision? What is the motivation? And how did it all begin? Now, the story of EmQuip Leadership Trainers and Development Partners Limited goes way back to almost 2 decades ago when I was a young teenager. And the experience I had as a young little boy in basic school was the major motivation and inspiration that has grown into what we now know as EmQuip Leadership Trainers and Development Partners Limited. Now, to give a brief background, I was raised and brought up and spent most of my teenage years in Kama local government area of Kwara State, Nigeria. About the beginning of my second decade of life, my family had to relocate unavoidably, and I had to complete my basic education in my hometown. And at the time, we were preparing for common entrance examination. Every child in basic school undergoes that examination before we now are able to go into high school. And as we were preparing for this examination, we had a lot of extramural classes. Our teachers were grooming us for the examination, and we had all of these preparatory classes, lectures, and all of that. And I could recall quite clearly the day to the examination. I did a lot of study, overnight. And when the D-Day came, we all came to school as early as possible and were oriented on what we needed to do, how we had to comport ourselves when we get to the examination venue. We had neatly dressed students, all of us prepared for the examination. That way we were matched to the examination venue. And soon enough, the examination booklets were distributed to each and every one of us, and we were instructed to begin. And I had an experience during that examination that has stayed with me ever since and became the primary motivation for what we are doing today at EmQuip. About 10 minutes into the examination, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Someone asked me, "Are you done?" I was really shocked. I was surprised. I wouldn't expect that for a 2 hours or so examination, one would be asking me after 10 minutes if I was done. So I told him, "No, I'm not done." And then he asked, "What number are you at?" And I told him, I can't quite remember actually what particular number I was on, but I know it was between 5 to 10. And all of a sudden, he landed a slap on me. He slapped me hard on the face, and I could not believe myself. I couldn't believe what was happening to me. This was unlike anything that I would ever imagine. And I was crying profusely. Tears were welling down my face. I couldn't imagine, why was I being punished? What have I done wrong? And this man asked me, "Are you a fool? Are you an idiot?" He said a lot of profane words against me, and I couldn't understand. And he asked me, "So you couldn't hear all along when these answers were being dictated?" It dawned on me that all of the answers to the questions had been dictated. And if you know me very well, people who know me know that whenever I'm focused on a thing, I'm so glued to it, I barely pay any attention to what goes on around me anymore. I didn't know that all of the answers had been dictated to all remaining students. And it was expected that anyone in the hall would have actually answered all of the questions. And this man was actually punishing me for not participating in the examination malpractices. I thought I was an idiot. I was a fool for not being aware of what was going on. And he dropped a piece of paper in front of me and said, "These are the answers." As a poor little boy, I was all alone, all by myself in that situation. It was one of the most devastating experiences I ever had in my life. And I sat there, and as he had instructed, I had no option than to keep picking all of the answers. And so was it that we came to the end of the examination, and I became the object of ridicule. Every one of my classmates was actually making mockery of me. In fact, they gave me a nickname back then I could remember. To them, I was actually lighted. I never thought in my life that we would be sitting an examination and it will be the people who were supposed to maintain the standard, who are supposed to uphold the standards, the invigilators, that will be complicit in the examination malpractices. In all of the examinations I had written up until that time, you see, the teachers were meant to actually ensure that we didn't participate in any form of malpractices. And they really enforced it in that even while writing an examination, you were not allowed to peep or to talk to any of your colleagues. But it turns out that in this instance, the teachers were complicit. And the invigilators were actually the champions of it all. And you couldn't actually do the right thing in such a situation. And after that experience, what that experience actually did to me, it seemed as though I was being enlightened on how things are done in a broken system. And so when I got into high school, one of the orientations I got was that as far as it's an internal school examination, you had to keep all of the standards. You had to ensure that you don't participate in any form of malpractices. But as soon as it is an external examination, then you have to forget all of the standards and look forward to being assisted. You couldn't do it by yourself. So I held on to that. I believed it. And so as I was approaching my third year in high school and we were preparing for our basic education certificate examination, not only was I expecting the same thing to happen, I actually was anticipating it. Now, that is what happens when a system is broken and people no longer live by principles and people lack character. You see, you begin to see a system where young people in their early days are beginning to see nothing wrong in cutting corners or doing things wrong. But then something happened to me shortly after I finished my basic education certificate examination, that is the examination we had in our JSS study. I began to reassess every situation. I began to assess the whole thing, everything that happened to me when I was in basic school and everything that happened to me in junior high school. And I told myself, this is wrong. This is not meant to happen in an institution. This is not meant to happen anywhere. A student is supposed to see their examination themselves. A student is not supposed to participate in examination malpractices, and teachers are not supposed to be complicit in examination malpractices. So I made a decision for myself in my SS1 and even in my sophomore years. I told myself that when the time comes and I'm to sit my final examinations in high school, nobody's going to help me. I'm going to prepare for my examinations. I'm going to succeed doing the right thing. And that was exactly what I did. And for the first time in my life, I got to realize that when you decide to do the right thing, where others have chosen that the wrong is the right, you're going to have a lot of enemies. So doing the right thing is not about being loved by others, because if you decide to do the right thing where the system is broken, you are going to be hated and you've got to be convenient with that. So I made that decision for myself. I made it a principle to myself. So I committed myself more to studying beyond all of my classmates to ensure that when I finish these examinations, I will be able to say that God has helped me through. I wasn't going to budge. And I made up my mind as well that if anybody were to attempt to do the same thing that happened to me when I was in basic school, I was going to take it up with that person. I did my examination actually, and I succeeded excellently in all of the examinations. And it taught me a lesson that we could actually do things right in a nation. And when I came out of high school, I began to see the brokenness in the system. I saw that the system is actually broken everywhere. Everybody is a victim of a broken system. It's unfortunate that the people who participate in examination malpractices, the teachers who champion examination malpractices and encourage students to participate in it, the same complain about the government. And we have this in all parastatals. We have it in every organization, that people no longer live by principles. People no longer have characters. People can no longer discipline themselves to do the right things. And that was where the seed was sown in me, that something has to be done. We need to raise a generation of young people who will do the right thing regardless of what the norm has become. And that was what motivated me. And I have since been pondering, how do we raise leaders who are true agents of transformation? How do we raise people who are going to stand by principles regardless of the pressure in their surroundings? And that launched me into a decade of search. I began to study, how do we raise leaders who are exemplary leaders? How do we raise transformative leaders? And it was in this period of my search that I figured out that we could actually do something about this. And I found out that if there is going to be transformation in this nation, that we really need to have an emergence of leaders who wouldn't care what other people see as normal, but then who look for what is right. They're going to live their life by principles, and they are not going to negotiate their principles for any reason. Men and women of character, of purpose. And it was in this period of research that I figured out that there are 5 components that make of a leader who is going to be an agent of transformation, and they are purpose, principles, character, discipline, and competence. And those today have become the framework of transformation upon which we build everything we do at EmQuip. And the goal of EmQuip is to raise a generation of leaders who have a deep sense of purpose towards driving transformation in any domain they find themselves in. And these leaders will be men of principles, women of principles, who will not negotiate principles for anything, who are going to hold themselves up to highest of standards and going to hold other people up to such standards as well, who are not going to sacrifice their principles for anything, not for life, not in death. And then there will be people of character. Character is who you are, people you can predict. When you make up your mind to become a person of character, people won't love you, but people will have no option but to respect your decisions. When they have observed you over the years and realize that you are so committed to your principles and you are not going to sacrifice it no matter what happens, no matter the pressures around you. These must also be people who can discipline themselves to do things right, and not just do things right, to do the right things. And then competence. I've got to realize as well that it's important that when you have purpose and you have principles and you have character and discipline, you must also be competent, because competence is going to be the expression, the visible manifestation of all of the other components that we've mentioned. EmQuip Leadership Trainers and Development Partners Limited has a goal to raise leaders, entrepreneurs, and professionals who are going to be built upon these foundations of purpose, principles, character, discipline, and competence. And I believe that this is what we need in our nation at a time like this. We need a generation of leaders who are not going to take nonsense. That is what we need. And we need them in all parastatals. We need them in schools. We need them in institutions. We need them as entrepreneurs. They are not going to sacrifice standards for convenience. They are not going to be sacrificing their standards to please other people. These are the kind of leaders that will emerge and transform our nation.